All right, let's just jump right into this. Have you ever heard of a perfectly legal robbery? I mean, one so incredibly audacious that it forced an entire multi-million-dollar industry to just completely rewrite its official rulebook overnight? Well, welcome to this explainer on the legendary Yellow Sam heist of 1975. Now, this isn't your typical story of guns, masks, or getaway cars. No, this is an absolute masterclass in finding a systemic loophole so massively flawed, you could literally ride a racehorse right through it. To really wrap our heads around this, the sheer scale of the payout is just staggering. £300,000. If we adjust that for inflation, we are talking about roughly $3.5 million today. And, here's the real kicker. This absolute fortune was taken from the bookmakers in broad daylight, without a single weapon, and most importantly, without breaking a single law. The mastermind behind this whole operation didn't bypass the rules. He actually used the house's own rules against them. Well, as you might imagine, the bookmakers were absolutely furious about being legally fleeced like this. In fact, they were so enraged that they decided to be incredibly petty when it finally came time to hand over the cash. They paid the mastermind, a notoriously sharp gambler named Barney Curley, in 108 literal, extremely heavy bags filled entirely with £1 notes. It was a complete logistical nightmare for him to transport, but honestly, I'm sure it was a deeply satisfying headache. So how exactly did Curley back them into such a tight corner? Okay, to really understand this heist, we have to look at these severe structural flaws in the pre-1975 gambling system. Back in those days, massive amounts of money placed in off-track betting shops directly dictated the official odds at the actual racetrack. Track bookmakers relied entirely on a single communication method, usually just one public phone line, to receive that off-track data and manually lower their odds to protect their margins right before the starting bell. And this is crucial. The absolute second that starting bell rang, those odds locked instantly. Enter our mastermind, Barney Curley. At the time, Curley was deeply in debt. He owed about £12,000 and desperately needed a massive, life-changing win. Now, the fundamental rule of track betting is pretty straightforward, right? The most sluggish, underperforming horse is going to get the biggest odds, meaning if you bet £1, you win 20. So Curley specifically went out and acquired a horse with a terrible track record, a horse named Yellow Sam. His goal was simple in theory, but incredibly difficult to execute. Make sure the track bookies gave Yellow Sam those highly profitable 20-to-1 odds and keep them completely in the dark until the bell rang. So, how did he manipulate these variables to pull off the impossible? Well, the scheme was like a perfectly choreographed dance. First, Curley intentionally raced Yellow Sam on muddy ground that just didn't suit the horse at all, which artificially tanked his official ratings so the bookies would severely underestimate him. Next, he quietly deployed a small army of 300 associates armed with cash to off-track betting shops all over the place. Then comes the genius part. He had to sever the track's only communication line to the outside world. Do that, and you trap the bookies blind, lock in those juicy 20-to-1 odds, and just watch your horse win the race. And let's be clear, this was the ultimate all-or-nothing gamble. Curley scraped together his entire life savings of £15,000. He painstakingly distributed this cash into hundreds of individual envelopes containing anywhere from £50 to £300 each and handed them out to his 300 trusted associates scattered all across Ireland. If this plan failed, Curley wouldn't just be broke. He was facing total financial ruin and very likely a stint in prison for his debts. There was absolutely no plan B here. So the trap is finally set for June 26, 1975, at the Belltowns Racecourse. Now, Curley didn't just pick this track at random. Oh no, it was a highly calculated choice. Why? Because the Belltowns track was incredibly small, it was remote, and, this is the linchpin of the whole operation, it only had one single public phone booth available for communication with the outside world. That lone phone booth was the entire system's Achilles heel. Now let's look at the execution, because the timing here is just beautiful. At exactly 25 minutes before the race, Curley's associate, a guy named Benny, steps into that singular phone booth. He occupies it entirely, just crying hysterically into the receiver about his dying aunt. The bookies behind him in line desperately need to use the phone, but, they're sympathetic to a family tragedy, so they wait. Then, exactly 5 minutes before the race, Curley's 300 associates strike, simultaneously placing massive bets on Yellow Sam in shops across the entire country. And at T0, the bell rings. Benny instantly hangs up. Just try to imagine the absolute chaos happening off track during those 25 minutes.
Off-track managers were frantically trying to call the track to warn the bookies about this sudden, massive flood of money coming in on Yellow Sam. They desperately needed to lower the payout odds, but the line was engaged. The starting bell rang, permanently locking in that incredibly high 20-to-1 payout. And at that exact moment, Benny wiped his fake tears, stepped out of the booth, announced to the waiting crowd, "A miracle, my aunt is better," and just promptly vanished into thin air.
Of course, all of this brilliant sabotage meant absolutely nothing if the horse didn't actually win, right? But what the bookies didn't know was that Yellow Sam was secretly incredibly fast on the hard summer ground present at Belwistown that day. While Curly watched anxiously, actually hiding away in the bushes so his mere presence wouldn't spook the bookies into dropping the odds, Yellow Sam absolutely dominated the 13 hurdles. He easily beat the heavy favorite Silver Road by a clear 2.5 lengths.
And this brings us to the really profound aftermath of the heist. The gambling industry was completely blindsided by this. To make sure this blind spot could never, ever be exploited again, they were forced to immediately and permanently rewrite their official rules. The contrast between the old system and the new one was stark. The industry instituted a mandatory minimum 30-minute processing delay for all large off-track bets. This brand new regulation guaranteed that off-track managers would always have a sufficient time buffer to communicate with track bookies, completely neutralizing that single point of failure vulnerability that Curly had so brilliantly exploited. Barney Curly became an absolute legend that day, because ultimately the true legacy of a legal heist like this is about exploiting systemic flaws to force institutional oversight. He didn't hack a computer or break into a vault. He simply read the rules better than the people who actually wrote them. He demonstrated perfectly that the biggest risks to any institution are so often built directly into the official rules themselves, just sitting there waiting for someone clever enough to find the bottleneck.
Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. The bookies thought their system was totally secure in 1975, right up until the exact moment it wasn't. As our modern world relies on ever more complex algorithms, high-frequency trading, and these massive digital communication networks, what current system has a hidden vulnerability? What network has a metaphorical single phone booth just waiting for a perfectly legal heist? Is there another Yellow Sam out there today just hiding in the fine print? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those questions, and I'll see you next time.